Welcome to our deep dive into the world of trauma, resilience, and healing. You gave us a fascinating mix of research articles, therapy techniques, and even a children's book.
Yeah, it's quite a collection. We'll be exploring how trauma affects the brain, how it differs from grief, and even the surprising ways that something called post-traumatic growth can occur.
Yeah, I was really struck by that idea of post-traumatic growth. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That something so painful could lead to positive change. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. One thing that jumped out at me from your sources is that trauma and grief are often used interchangeably, but they're actually quite different.
That's a crucial distinction. You see, grief is a natural response to loss. It's how we process the absence of someone or something dear to us. Trauma, though, is an experience that overwhelms our coping mechanisms and leaves a lasting impact on us, both mentally and physically.
It's like the difference between feeling sad and being completely shattered. And you sent in this children's book, Brave Bart, which really highlights how even young minds can be deeply affected by trauma.
Exactly. Brave Bart shows us the unique challenges that traumatized children face and how their understanding of the world can be shaped by these experiences.
And that brings us to the idea of private logic, which I found fascinating. So you're saying that a child might react in ways that seem confusing to us, but from their perspective, it makes perfect sense.
Precisely. Imagine a child who's been bitten by a dog.
Okay.
Because of that trauma, they might now fear all furry animals, even friendly ones. Their private logic, based on their experience, now tells them that fur equals danger.
Wow, that's such a clear example. It really helps me understand how trauma can warp a child's perception of the world. And our sources dive even deeper, exploring how trauma actually affects the brain itself, especially the difference between what they call implicit and explicit memory.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting. Implicit memory is often unconscious and emotional. It's where trauma can get stuck, leading to things like physical symptoms or being easily triggered. Explicit memory, on the other hand, deals with facts and events we can consciously recall.
So it's like trauma can get trapped in the body, almost like a physical echo of the experience.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it like riding a bike. You don't consciously think about every step, but your body remembers how to do it. That's procedural memory, and trauma can embed itself in our nervous system, that way triggering those automatic fight, flight, or freeze responses, even when there's no actual danger present.
Okay, so now I'm starting to see why some trauma survivors have trouble putting their experiences into words.
Hmm.
If those memories are held in the body as procedural memory, they might not be easily accessible to language. It's like their body remembers what happened, even if their conscious mind doesn't.
Exactly. And this is a key reason why traditional talk therapy can sometimes be limited when it comes to treating trauma. It highlights the need for alternative approaches that engage the body and emotions more directly. Which leads us to the idea of nonverbal therapies, specifically something called structured sensory interventions for children, adolescents, and parents, or SIT-CAP, which seems to be a recurring theme in the materials you provided.
Yeah, SIT-CAP really piqued my curiosity. From what I gathered, it helps people process trauma without relying solely on talking. Instead, it uses things like art, play, and sensory experiences to tap into those deeper implicit memories we were just talking about.
Right. What's fascinating about SIT-CAP is that it recognizes the limitations of language when it comes to trauma. It allows people to express themselves through drawing movement or other sensory activities, creating a safe and structured environment for them to work through their experiences without having to put everything into words.
And you included some amazing examples of how effective this can be,
Yeah.
like the World Trade Center Children's Mural Project, where children used art to process their trauma and grief after 9/11. That really struck me as incredibly powerful.
Yes, and the magical moments section of one of the sources shares some really powerful anecdotes about how these interventions can help children have breakthroughs in their healing, especially those who have struggled to communicate their experiences verbally.
I was particularly drawn to how the therapist's role is described in SIT-CAP. It's not just about handing kids art supplies. It's about being genuinely curious and willing to step into their world without judgment or interpretation.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about creating a safe space where the child feels seen, heard, and understood. It reminds me of what the source material calls the ethnographic interview process, where the therapist observes and interacts with the child to understand their unique perspective rather than imposing their own assumptions.
So instead of saying, "Why did you draw that?" the therapist might ask, "Can you tell me about this part of your drawing?" or "What does this color make you feel?" It's about letting the child lead and reveal their inner world through those creative expressions.
Exactly. It's about honoring the child's experience and empowering them to tell their story in their own way.
That focus on empowerment is a perfect segue to our next topic: Resilience. You provided a lot of research on how to cultivate this crucial quality, not just in children, but in people of all ages. And I have to say, I love that we're not just talking about surviving trauma, but about actually thriving in the face of it.
Yeah.
This whole concept of post-traumatic growth is really intriguing.
What's so inspiring about post-traumatic growth is that it shows us that even though trauma can be deeply challenging, it can also be a catalyst for positive change. Researchers like Tedeschi and Calhoun found that trauma can lead to deeper self-awareness, a stronger sense of purpose, and even a greater appreciation for life.
So it's not about erasing or forgetting the trauma, but about integrating it into our life story and using it as a source of strength. But wouldn't integrating a traumatic experience into one's life story be incredibly difficult? How do people actually achieve post-traumatic growth?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that resilience isn't about being invincible. It's about learning to bend without breaking. It's about developing the skills and inner resources to navigate challenges, bounce back from setbacks, and find meaning in our experiences, even the painful ones.
And it seems like SIT-CAP plays a role in fostering resilience, too. It's not just about processing the trauma, but also about equipping people with the tools they need for coping and self-regulation.
Absolutely. By giving people a sense of mastery and control over their experiences, especially challenging ones, SIT-CAP can help build the confidence and self-efficacy they need to navigate future challenges.
One of the studies you sent by Werner and Smith really caught my eye. They studied resilience in children facing incredible adversity and found that things like a strong support system and a sense of belonging could make all the difference.
That's where the circle of courage model comes in, emphasizing the importance of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity as key components of resilience. It's a really holistic approach that recognizes how interconnected our emotional, social, and even spiritual well-being truly are.
So it's not just about gritting your teeth and pushing through. It's about creating an environment where people feel supported, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential. And that brings us to the broader application of these principles in something called trauma-informed practices.
Trauma-informed care is all about shifting our perspective from asking, "What's wrong with you?" to "What happened to you?" It's about recognizing how prevalent trauma is and the impact it has on individuals, families, and entire communities.
It's about creating systems and environments that prioritize safety, trustworthiness, choice collaboration, and of course, empowerment.
And it's not just limited to mental health settings. Trauma-informed practices are relevant in schools, healthcare, social services, even the justice system.
You included some fantastic examples of what this looks like in action. The I Feel Better Now program, for instance, shows how powerful drawing can be in helping children process trauma and build resilience.
In the Traumatic Event Crisis Intervention Plan, USENT outlines a structured approach for schools to respond to crises in a way that minimizes harm and fosters healing.
It's so encouraging to see these tangible examples of how we can move beyond awareness to action, creating communities that truly understand and support those who have experienced trauma, fostering a culture of empathy and understanding where people feel safe, seen, and heard. It all comes down to creating a world where vulnerability is met with compassion and understanding, not with stigma or judgment, moving away from blame and towards support. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's essential to understand the difference between grief and trauma. Grief is a natural healing process, while trauma can create deeper wounds that might need a different kind of care.
And recognizing that trauma can show up in so many different ways, not just through what someone says, but also through physical sensations, emotions, and even their behavior. It's not always obvious.
Exactly, and that's why approaches like SITT-CAP are so vital. It offers a way to heal that goes beyond just talking, engaging the body and emotions in a way that feels safe and structured.
And we can't forget the idea that resilience isn't something you're born with. It's a set of skills that can be learned and strengthened over time.
Right.
We all have the potential to become more resilient.
And even more encouraging, the research shows that post-traumatic growth is a real possibility. Trauma can be a catalyst for profound personal transformation, leading to greater strength, a clearer sense of purpose, and even a deeper appreciation for life.
It's almost like finding a pearl in the roughest of oysters. And finally, I think we've learned how crucial it is to create trauma-informed environments, whether it's in our homes, schools, workplaces, or communities. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe to be vulnerable and supported in their healing.
Absolutely. This is where we can make a real difference. By shifting our perspectives and how we interact with one another, we can build a world where people feel safe, supported, and empowered to heal and thrive.
It's been such an insightful journey exploring all of this with you. Before we sign off, do you have any final thoughts for our listener?
Just this. Trauma is not a life sentence. While its effects can be profound and long-lasting, there is always hope. By understanding trauma and embracing those resilience building strategies we talked about and working to create more trauma-informed environments, we can help ourselves and others find healing and growth.
Beautifully said. And to our listener, I encourage you to keep exploring the resources you shared with us. There's so much more to discover. Until our next deep dive, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep believing in the power of healing.